So I was really hoping that I wasn't going to have to put the camera this close to my face. But today we are talking about using the Sony A6300 or buying it in 2022. Let's get right into it. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and save you time and tell you that you should just go ahead and buy this camera in 2022 because this camera is years beyond its time. Now let's get right into the positives and the cons, starting with, let's go ahead and start with our positive number one. That's that this camera shoots in 6K and then the image is later compressed down to 4K. What that means is that you're going to have plenty of space to fix your horizon if you want to go ahead and export a video in 1080p or, just go ahead and export a 4K video if that's what you want to do. Positive number two, and that is that this camera shoots in S-Log2 and S-Log3. For those of you who don't know what that is a picture profile for your camera that lets you extend the dynamic range of your video. It's going to give you more flexibility with color grading, using LUTs, and all that jazzy stuff. If you are a serious filmmaker, you want some flat picture profiles, trust me, and this camera can do it. Moving along into one of the most important things for me with this camera is that this camera has active eye autofocusing. So basically what this camera does is that it focuses, creates a little green box around the eye, and it makes sure that it tracks the subject and it ensures focus on the eye, keeping that extra sharp, if you know what I'm saying. I do want to make mention of something, as I can already see that this camera is flipping in and out of focus. I'm using a Tamron 35mm lens. It's not a native Sony lens. This camera will work better with a native Sony lens when it comes to focusing. Nonetheless, it's pretty snappy. It does the job. It's not going to do the same job as the A7 IV, whatever. It does a great job though. Point number four, and that is that this camera can be found fairly cheap on the secondhand market, especially anything in the 6000 series, 6100, 6200, 6300, 6400, and so on and so forth. If you guys do have the option of, bumping up the budget and moving up to the 6400 at least, I definitely would recommend, as it has tap autofocus and in-body stabilization, but nonetheless, the 6300 remains a beast. Let's move along to point number five, and that is that the lenses for this camera are relatively cheap comparison to its full frame counterparts. As you can imagine, it uses smaller glass, which needs to cover a smaller sensor. So based on that, you're getting cheap lenses. One tip that I would actually use would be my point number six, is that you can use full frame lenses on this camera. In fact, I would highly recommend it, because if you ever plan or have a feeling that you might move up to full frame, you might want to already have some full frame lenses, as the crop sensor lenses won't work as well on them. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, when you are using a full frame lens on a crop sensor camera, you are using the sharpest part of the lens on your crop sensor camera, meaning that the sharpest part of any lens is the center point. And if you're not using that center point because you're using a full frame lens on a crop sensor camera, you're using literally the sharpest part of the lens. So go ahead and do that. I would super recommend it. If you got to cheap out on the body, get some really nice lenses, full frame ones. One thing I want to add is to make sure that you're aware of the crop factor of any lens if you are going to be doing just that. So I use my 85mm Voltrex lens on my A6300 from time to time, and that amounts to about 122 millimeters, if I'm not mistaken. I might have to double check that. But just to give you guys an idea what you're looking at. Moving on to point, I don't even know what point we're at. I'm going to put that at the bottom. Whatever point this is that this camera is water resistant. It's not waterproof, but it's water resistant. I have had this camera out on a full out blizzard of a day, and it did just fine. Snow was piling up on top of it. Never had an issue since. I've had this camera for about 6 years now. I'm kind of guessing here, but ever since its launch, I got it a few days after its launch, and it's just now starting to show some wear and tear and whatnot, but it's been a pretty solid camera all around. I continue to believe in Sony's build practices, so good on you, Sony. One of my absolute favorite things about this camera is that it shoots at 120 frames at 1080p. That's a lot of frames that you guys are getting, so you guys are getting ultra mega slow-mo. Just keep in mind that if you guys are shooting at 120 frames, that you guys double your shutter speed, 240, that's going to be the minimum. Just keep it up there. Moving along is the next point is that we have a mic port on the camera. Literally on the side of the camera, you can connect the microphone to it. I don't believe this option was very common on cameras back in the day. However, it is now, and we are grateful that the Sony A6300 has that option. This is going to be a big one for you street photographers out there. The next point is that this camera has silent shooting mode. Along with its small body, I guess that could be the next part, and frame size, is that this camera is pretty good if you're one of those street photographers that likes being on the low. You don't like anybody actually being aware that you're shooting. Again, you could take advantage of how small it is and the silent shooting mode, meaning that you will not hear the shutter actually click over because it doesn't have one. Simple as that. Let's move along to our first con. And it's kind of funny because I feel like this is a funny one. But con number one is that this camera is small. And I know I said that was a positive thing as well, but it could also be a negative thing. Now, for years and years and years and decades now, we've had these huge body cameras, right? So when people hire you to do a photo shoot, they typically will expect you to show up with lots of gear and a big camera. So when they see the small form factor of your camera, they will think that it's, you know, like a point and shoot or a Cyber Shot Pro by Canon from the 1990s. And they tend to, you know, not want to take you seriously. So based on that, I probably would recommend on getting a battery grip. A battery grip will give it a lot of bulk. Also, it will extend the battery life of this camera, which, you know, is a negative, unfortunately, as well. So it's just something to keep in mind. Obviously, if your clients don't care and have never, you know, made a comment about it, maybe it won't even matter. But I have had it made as a comment, like, look at your camera, it's so small. I'm like, yeah, it is. But my lenses are big. Moving along, we're going to address one that was actually fixed by Sony in their later versions of this camera, the 61 and the 6200, which is really weird what they do with their numbers. They like bounce back and forth. But anyways, there is no front flip screen on this camera. If you're looking at its later counterparts, you know, they solved it, whatever. And there is actually some fixes. I'm going to leave some links below to a front flip screen mirror that you can use, which I am actually using on this camera right now. I could actually see myself. So that solves that. I don't know if it's a big deal. It's a $20 part you can buy to fix that problem. If you just don't like having an extra piece of plastic hanging off your camera, well, then upgrade the camera. It's just as simple as that. Moving along to our con number 3, and that's that this camera has one SD card slot. You know, typically I wouldn't be shooting a wedding with a crop sensor camera, but to each their own. This camera is definitely capable of doing so. I have actually done that in the past. Had some great results, but again, it wouldn't be my first choice. So if that is something that affects your buying decision, then you could just go ahead and, you know, exit this video right now. So I'll see you later. Our next con is something we actually touched on our first point, which is that this camera has a very small battery. It's the original NP whatever. I can't remember what they're called. But anyways, small Sony batteries. They don't last very long if you're recording video. If you're shooting pictures, it's plenty. I take 2 with me if I'm taking pictures, but this isn't the main picture camera I use anymore, so it does not matter to me anymore. We're moving into no IBIS, no in-body image stabilization is available on this particular camera. Keep in mind, if you have the money to do so, bump up to the Sony A6400, virtually the same camera with a touchscreen and IBIS. Just keep that in mind. And moving to our final point, again, this is something that was addressed by Sony on the later versions of this camera, the 6400, 6100, 6200, is that this camera does not have animal eye autofocus. If that is a big part of what you do, then this is not the camera for you. Simple as that. Again, it's something that they fixed, so if you can afford to do so, bump up, upgrade, get the other cameras. If it's not that important and you can save yourself a few bucks, get this camera. Now, guys, I'm going to give you guys my final thoughts. I've had this camera for a very, very long time. It has served me well. It has paid for itself with the clients that I have shot. And there was a point in time where this is all that I shot with when I gave up my Canon 5D Mark III. So it's just something to keep in mind. It is a very capable camera. You can do professional work. It's just about, you know, what you do with it in post and, you know, what you know ahead of time. You need to know the limits of this camera in order to be able to present something professional. Luckily, because I have shot many things, music videos, modeling reels, weddings, I have all types of examples. So I hope you can take a moment to appreciate what this camera is. And I hope that this video has helped you make your decision in whether this camera is worth buying in 2022. I definitely think it is. I think it's definitely a great camera for you to get your feet wet on, photography, videography, especially videography, because there's just a lot of value in what this camera is. You get a lot. Keep in mind, I come from a time when you would buy a camera that had no video capabilities. It was just a photo camera. You wanted a video camera, you get a video camera, right? So luckily we are in a time and place where we can appreciate where technology has brought us and where it is taking us, and continue to, buy used gear and just, make some art, make some money, whatever it is that you do. If you guys found this video useful, I would really appreciate a subscription, as I see that many of you are not subscribed. And those that are, I, again, appreciate you. 100 thanks over and over. But yeah, until next time, guys, where we will be talking about either the GoPro or the DJI Mini 2, take care.